Sarah. So I'm Denise Moody. I'm here with, I serve as one of the Expanded Clearinghouse Subcommittee co-chairs, along with Amanda Haymaker and Robert Prentice. And we're going to start off this joint session with our Subawards subcommittee and hand it off to them. So we'll start with a brief update on what we've been doing with Expanded Clearinghouse. And on the next slide, what we're providing is just an overview. Oh, I'm sorry. So here's the agenda, and then the next slide. Go to the next slide. So just to give you everyone who is not familiar with the Expanded Clearinghouse an overview, brief overview of what it is. It's an online repository of institutional profile information. It is housed off the FDP website. And what it's intended to do is to alleviate a significant amount of administrative burden as we collaborate with each other through sub-recipient collaboration. And it's supposed to alleviate the need for pass-through entity customized letters of intent or sub-recipient commitment forms, the multi-page forms that we often send to each other. And our next slide shows you the subcommittee members. We have not changed this since May when we added a couple new members. And I just want to give a special thank you again to Chris Renner, who does the clearinghouse development and provides the system support, as well as Robert and the profile reviewers, Emily Lacey, Jackie Lucas, Carrie McHugh, and Jennifer Rodas, because they're behind the scenes every day looking at the institutional profile updates and all of the submissions and working with each one of you to make sure that the data that is published in the clearinghouse is as accurate as possible. So it's quite a bit of work that is done behind the scenes throughout the year. And in the next slide, we'll show you we have already hit 309 published profiles in the clearinghouse. When we provided our update in May, we had just reached 300 profiles, and now we're at 309, and that it continues to grow. We have 216 FDP members, so just about every FDP member has a profile in the clearinghouse, and we also have 93 non-FDP members. And the next slide, what you'll see is the breakdown of the cohorts. We continue every quarter to invite a list of non-FDP members to join the clearinghouse for a small fee. And we just had 10 join for the last quarter. And we put out an invitation for 42 more institutions just last week. And so we'll wait to hear back from them at the end of the month to see if any of those will join us. Right now, that wait list is limited to US-based institutions who undergo a single audit, but we're going to provide an update in a few minutes on considerations to expand that population. And then the next slide, what we wanted to provide is some clarification on what it means to be a clearinghouse participant and the benefits you get as a clearinghouse participant. Whether you're an FDP member or not, everybody should be relieved of customized letters of intent requests through pass-through entities each time you're acting as a sub-recipient. And also FDP members get a benefit of, on the Subawards agreement side, to not have terms and conditions imposed on you beyond what the prime agreement specifies. We know that there are some cases where if you are a state institution, there are certain certifications that you're required to hand down, but those should be as limited as possible. And what we want to encourage is that even if you're not an FDP member, everyone should have equal access to the subaward agreement templates and be able to utilize them through collaboration, because the FDP mission is all about reducing burden, regardless of whether or not you're an FDP member. So we do want to encourage that practice as much as possible. I'm going to hand it over to Amanda Haymaker, who's going to talk about some potential enhancements that we're going to make this fall.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So we're going to talk just briefly about changes that we're looking at related to the FCOI clearinghouse certifications as it relates to members or profiles in the expanded clearinghouse. So currently we know that that FDP members, as well as I believe several hundred other entities have certified their COI policy in regards to 42 CFR Part 50, which I can't even remember how many years ago we did that, but I think it's been close to 10 at this point. So that we know that that certification is out there from that past activity. Next slide, please. What we're proposing for the clearinghouse, the expanded clearinghouse profiles, is to capture a broader base of compliance with the different agency policies that have come out recently. So what we'd like to do is add this ability to indicate whether or not you have you have a policy in place that's consistent with the guidelines from the agencies that are listed there on the screen, as well as any others that you may want to identify. So this would allow you to either say, yes, you have one, or that it's not applicable perhaps to your institution if, say, maybe you don't do any NASA research at your institution, for example. And then in addition to that, we would also add a certification related to conflict of commitment policies. And you see that question there on the screen. And then the last question, it's a little cut off at the bottom, but it talks about organizational conflict of interest policies in regards to FAR 9.5. So that would be a yes/no option as well. So that's what we're proposing. I believe we're going to gather some feedback on that here in the near future, and hopefully we can get that change in place soon. But I think Robert has some more changes to talk about and can probably talk a little bit more to the timeline.
I just want to interject really quickly, just let everyone know that we were working very closely with the Conflict of Interest Subcommittee and on developing these certifications. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we did coordinate closely with them.
Yes. Next slide, I think Robert is presenting.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. I want to talk about some additional enhancements that we are considering. Some of these are in the form of streamlining the information in the clearinghouse to just provide the essential data for the functioning of the clearinghouse. We're thinking about removing two fields. The first is the primary auditee contact person. This is just for those organizations that are audited at a higher level as part of a state university system or a state. This is the contact person for that higher level audit entity. The name, the email address, the phone number, that information is currently available on the data collection form in the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and it's kept up to date. And so for those rare occasions where that contact is needed, it can be found there. We'd like to take that out of the expanded clearinghouse. And then second, the dunce, which was replaced by the UEI back in April. There still is a need to refer to legacy dunce numbers in many cases, and I found that usaspending.gov has a reliable crosswalk there for that information. So we wouldn't be removing any information that couldn't be found elsewhere. And then we have some other removals that we'd like to make. These are for the expiration dates for the assurances and the registrations shown on the screen. Now we would retain the fact of the registration or the assurance. We would retain the number of the assurance. We would just be removing the expiration date. And we think that this won't cause a problem because quite often organizations in the clearinghouse, they have the option to say not applicable for these expiration dates, and they do, and that doesn't seem to cause a problem. And so we'd like to take those out, take a moving part that isn't critical to the functioning of the clearinghouse out of the clearinghouse. And then next, we've had some inquiries from organizations who would like to participate in the clearinghouse as non-FDP organizations who are outside of the United States, mostly in Canada. And the interesting thing about those organizations is that they are subject to the single audit. And so adding a profile for those organizations wouldn't require a whole lot of changes, but there are some. The address fields would need to be modified, and so there's some fields that would need to be removed. And so we'd like to consider making some changes to allow those organizations to participate as non-FDP organizations. And I think one nice side benefit of this is that as organizations outside of the US, they do not currently have their single audit available in the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. And by hosting them in the Expanded Clearinghouse, they would then be publicly available. And then the last enhancement that we're considering is, and we've talked about this before, is integrating the Expanded Clearinghouse with Sam.gov. Sam has an API and can talk system to system with the clearinghouse, or could potentially. And so we could potentially import the expiration date for Sam.gov into the clearinghouse. The challenge of doing something like that is always to have controls in place so that we don't import erroneous information. I think we've all experienced bad data that migrates from system to system to system, and we don't want to be a part of that that process. And so these are the things we'll be discussing in future meetings and amongst ourselves, and be curious to hear any feedback you may have about these plans.
Oh, Robert, there is one question. Could you clarify about the audit contact? Is the primary auditee contact person the same as the audit contact in the contacts tab?
That is an excellent question. These are different. The audit contact on the contacts tab is the audit contact with the participating organization in the clearinghouse. The primary auditee contact person is only in those cases where the organization is audited at the level of, say, the state of Texas. And so the primary auditee contact person for, say, UT Austin is an accountant with the state auditor's office with the state of Texas. And so it's a slightly different field, and I don't think it's quite as useful.
Yeah, and I think that's often where there's a lot of confusion, where the primary auditee contact gets entered as the institutional contact versus the wider. So.
Okay, so just some additional reminders. As always, we'd like you to keep your profile information up to date, particularly the audit reports that come in every year and any expiring certifications, although we're working to get those out of the clearinghouse where possible, to keep your contacts up to date, and to check the institutional letter of intent when you're a subrecipient to ensure that all relevant project-related information is included, and to accept other participants' letter of intent in the Expanded Clearinghouse. And as always, we are available at our help desk or for general questions. Those emails go to all of the subcommittee. And we continue to maintain a wait list for organizations outside of the FDP or not FDP members who are interested in participating in the clearinghouse, and you can sign up there.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Robert, and Expanded Clearinghouse. So if this is your first FDP meeting with us, welcome. We're really glad you're here. My name is Kari Tetro, and I'm one of the Subboard Subcommittee co-chairs, along with Alice Ruther and Kevin Ritchie. I'll be kicking off the Subboard Subcommittee portion of the presentation with our working group updates. So as you can see, the working groups are in various states of activity, so I'll just sort of provide some high-level overviews. Alice Ruther and Tyra Darville-Lane have been working tirelessly on the Sub-Recipient Monitoring Tools Working Group, And after I finish with this slide, I'll turn it over to Alice and Tyler so they can go into more details. But a quick note about the Invoice Review Standards Working Group. This is an ongoing group with the Finance, Costing, and Audit Committee. The group will develop subaward invoice review standards and guidance based on feedback from previous listening sessions. And the work is being absorbed under the Sub-Recipient Monitoring Tools Working Group going forward. The Templates Working Group and FAQ Guidance Working Group are also ongoing. The regularly scheduled templates update will be completed in 2023 after careful review, and the FAQ Guidance Working Group will be closely involved with any changes to the templates and related resources in the coming year as well. And sadly, Stephanie Stone is stepping away as the FTP Subawards Template Working Group lead. Over the years, she's done an incredible job with this working group, but we're very excited to announce that Beth Kingsley and Carrie Chesbrough have enthusiastically agreed to step in as the new group co-leads. Beth is the Associate Director of Subaward Management in Yale's Office of Sponsored Projects, and Carrie is the Assistant Director of Subawards and Sub-Recipient Monitoring at Stanford. Both are bringing a wealth of knowledge into this position, and they are genuinely wonderful human beings, lots of enthusiasm, excellent presenters, and also very funny. Beth and Carrie can introduce themselves and also ask for volunteers to support the template update process in the coming months. Beth and Carrie, anybody? Are they there?
Thanks, Kari. Yes, we're very excited to join the templates working group lead. And yes, please, anybody who wants to volunteer to work on this group, we would gladly take that information. You can email the FTP Subawards email address to express that interest. And I'm very excited to join, as Kari mentioned. Beth?
Can everyone hear me? Kind of? Okay, I was talking before and no one was reacting. So thankfully Carrie jumped in before it got too awkward. Thank you, Carrie. That's a very, very nice introduction. It's a lot to live up to. But yeah, we're really excited about this. We're anyone who wants to volunteer, we would love to work with you. So Carrie mentioned the email again, that's subawards@theftp.org. Come join us. It'll be awesome.
And hopefully we'll see like your cat pop in there too, Beth. That'd be great. So thank you both.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next three working groups we'll discuss are currently pending, but we anticipate these will probably see a lot of activity in the next year, especially within the OTA working group. There seems to be an uptick in usage of the other transaction mechanisms with our federal sponsors. And yesterday, the contracts subcommittee polled the audience during their session, and 71% of respondents were interested in continuing OTA discussions within the FTP. So the subcommittee will focus on problematic terms and how to navigate OTAs as the prime recipient, while the Subawards subcommittee will contribute to this effort by focusing on subawards under OTAs from various federal agencies, not just NIH. So if you have an OTA, our current guidance is to begin with a subcontract sample, which is meant to be edited as the prime contract or as the OTA warrants. Just make sure that you remove the FTP moniker when you make significant changes. The topic around our next pending working group has seen more action this last year as well. Federally funded research and development centers have been a particularly popular discussion point within the research administration community, as well as national conferences and listservs. And based on the increased interest, a collaborative working group was created with the contracts subcommittee. And just like above, the contract subcommittee is focused on understanding the process and framework for working with Ffrdcs And the Subawards subcommittee will contribute to this effort by focusing on situations where FDP members might be sending money to FFRDCs. So for example, situations where the FFRDC looks a lot like a sub-recipient, but may have requirements incompatible with the normal pass-through entity sub-relationship. And we'll address some of these challenges with the FFRDCs that we heard through our thought exchange later in the presentation. Our last pending working group is a collaborative effort with the compliance committee. And the overall goal of the single IRB working group is to produce guidance on how to address single IRB situations in Subawards. And last but not least, the IACUC MOU working group is complete. Yesterday, Amanda Humphrey went into great detail on the MOU background at the compliance committee session. And if you didn't get a chance to attend yesterday's session, we highly recommend watching the recording. Very interesting, a lot of excellent information. And the FDP IACUC MOU sample and guidance have been published on the compliance committee's website. So the Subawards subcommittee might work on an optional subaward attachment related to the IACUC MOU. So we'll announce any changes as they come. And those are your working group updates. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Carrie. The Sub-Recipient Monitoring Working Group has been working on 3 different initiatives, and one of them is the Sub-Recipient Monitoring Tool Survey. This survey is meant to identify the research administration community's priorities on sub-recipient monitoring tools, and the results will drive the working group's effort during the next coming months. The initial survey was sent to the National Research Administration community, and it was sent on August 17. It's still open through September 30. We are expecting to receive 1 survey per organization, so make sure that you use these next 2 weeks to if you haven't done so yet, please complete the survey and provide us the feedback that we need to prioritize our work and provide the tools that the community is looking for. We are planning to edit or modify the current tools that we have for FTP, like the risk assessment, the invoice template, but we are also suggesting different tools and proposing different tools like a financial questionnaire, like the single IRB guidance, the invoice checklist, and the Nsap, which is the non-single added entity profile. We are going to talk about that in a little bit. So please make sure you answer the survey, and if you don't have the link, we are going to put it in the chat in a couple of minutes so you can go there and take it. The survey is collecting awareness, demographical and usage and improvement data on the current and proposed monitoring tools for the Subawards monitoring, and then we will plan to share the results of the FDP of this survey with the FDP January 23 meeting. Next slide, please. So one of the tools that we are proposing is the non-single added profile. As Denise was mentioning earlier before, in the Expanded Clearinghouse, we have only single added entities with their information in the Expanded Clearinghouse, but we are trying to extend that to non-single added entities. And the first step to do that is having this pilot of this form that was developed by the working group. The form is a combination of the Expanded Clearinghouse profile plus a financial questionnaire that was previously developed by another working group for FDP. With this form, we are collecting, the form is going to be hosted in the FDP. It's a PDF form, and it has different sections like audit or the lack thereof. It includes internal controls, fund management, cost sharing, cost transfer, personnel costs, procurement, and so on and so forth. And we are asking specific questions about these topics, but we are also asking, or the form includes the ability to attach policies, procedures, or links to this information at the organization level. So the organization that is completing the form can provide all the information that we need. Tyra is going to talk further about that, but in the meantime, I just want to mention that we will also, we have a list of organizations that are already interested to participate, but we would like to invite PTEs or FDP members to nominate more pilotees. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, the Nsap is a PDF form. It includes some logic embedded in it, and depending on the answers that the user is providing, the form is going to show or hide more questions or possible answers. So I will transfer this to Tyra so she can provide more detail on this form.
Thank you, Alice. So are you guys seeing the form? I just want to make sure. Okay. So this is the opening page of the Nsap, and it gives a lot of guidance and just a little bit of understanding as to what this form is used for. It's indicating that the organization is completing the form consistent with previous expression of interest to participate in the pilot. And so as Alice mentioned earlier, we are looking to invite entities to participate in the pilot, and we'll have some polling questions for this group so that it can inform the criteria for nominating piloteers for the pilot. And again, the information provided will be publicly available through the FDP website, and it will be used by the pass-through entities to support compliance with federal regulations as outlined in the uniform guidance. And it gives just, you know, really brief guidance as they begin to complete the form. Page 1 of the form. I'm going to just give you a couple of examples of the functionality of the form. So page 1 of the form is asking for general information. And again, the information that we're collecting here is similar to what is being collected in the profiles for the single audit entities, but it is different where it is supposed to be different. One of the things that we ask is whether or not the entity is a U.S. organization. And if they indicate yes, then as you see here, the logic built in will allow these fields to appear: congressional district and EIN or tax ID. If the organization selects no, then those questions will disappear because they're not applicable to non-US entities. So there's fields and different information, again, similar to what is being requested on the existing profiles in the Expanded Clearinghouse. Another feature of the Nsap is that it allows, in response to, for example, whether an entity has or does not have a rate agreement. And if they do not have a rate agreement, they can have these two options to select from, either to elect the 10% de minimis or to request to negotiate. Also, there's hover guidance on where you see question marks, where it gives the organization completing the profile information about the particular section of the profile and that particular topic. And as you see here, there are opportunities to either attach their rate agreements. So for example, if they say, yes, they have a rate agreement, they can attach their rate agreement, or they can use the blank field to incorporate the link to their rate agreement. Same here for fringe. So I just wanted to show you all these brief functionalities of the Nsap form. As we've been saying over and over again, the pilot is going to be very critical to our ability to determine that this is going to be as useful to you all as PTEs as well as the sub-recipients as the current Expanded Clearinghouse profile is. And so we want to just reiterate to you some of the benefits that are associated with the use of the Nsap. And again, the Nsap is, it has a similar collection of information that's collected in the current Expanded Clearinghouse profile. And it's also going to be publicly accessible, however, centrally located as a web link. So it won't be added to the Expanded Clearinghouse system, but it will be linked on the FDP website so that entities can have access to those. Again, the main thing is to reduce administrative burden. And so as it relates to the burden to the sub-recipient, it eliminates their need to complete forms every time a subcontract is issued to their organization. It will also create a familiarity with the Nsap template, the format of it, and the questions that are there. So rather than filling out different forms, they're filling out one form, it has a certain format, and it'll be familiar to them as they continue to fill it out and update it as may be needed. The burden that is reduced to the PTE, again, it's publicly accessible. It eliminates the need to send out forms to sub-recipients for completion. And then it also aids in the sub-recipient risk assessment because the information that is gathered will assist in the conduct of that risk assessment. And it also will provide you opportunity for documentation to your files as to the conduct of their risk assessment and the outcomes of that risk assessment. So as we move ahead, we have 3 polling questions that we want you all to consider as we identify what are the criteria to invite piloteers to participate in the pilot.
I just want to say something before we go to the poll, Tyra, and it is that the pilot is expected to last for 1 year at no cost for the sub-recipients or the participating organizations. And beyond that time, we are going to have a nominal fee. The pilot, the Nsap should be renewed at least annually or whenever the information changes. That is in answer of one of the questions that we received on the chat. And with that, I think we are ready to go to the poll, right?
Yes, so let me just give a little bit of information about these polling questions. So we need your assistance in identifying and establishing the criteria for inviting a pilotee. So the first question is just asking, would you as an institution participate in the pilot by refraining from sending other institutional forms or questionnaires to the piloteers? So we want to know if you would be interested, and based on the information that has been presented to you. And then as a, again, we want to invite organizations to participate in the pilot by completing the Nsap profile. And so we want to set some criteria for that. So the next question is asking, so for example, oh, I see some results here. So we have 61% currently that are unsure, but 38% are saying yes, so thank you.
So about the 61% that is unsure, maybe we would like to hear from you, organizations, in terms of what would change the unsure to yes. Would you like to have like an in-depth presentation of the form itself, the type of documentation that we are collecting from the organizations, and whatnot? So we don't have a poll for that question, but if you can put some comments in the chat or send your feedback to the Subawards email at ftp.org. Please send your comments, and we want to hear from you, because the interest is to reduce administrative burden all the way through, but also to have a form that is going to capture most of the need of information from the community, from the membership. So please, if you can send some feedback to us, we will appreciate it, to make the maybe unsure move to yes.
And Alice, I just want to say, Alice and Tyra, the maybe unsure could be people that don't feel comfortable speaking on behalf of their institution. So I would say that yes is probably more than 38%. So, you know, we have 370 participants right now. So that, I think some of them might be in the maybe unsure category for that reason, but there's a lot of positive feedback in the chat so far. So I would say probably above 38% right now.
Thank you. I agree with you, Kevin.
Yeah, so as Alice mentioned, depending on your appetite to know more information about this Nsap, we would be happy to submit a request to do a separate demonstration of the form and have a more in-depth conversation about the information that is included there. So when you were thinking about nominating a piloteer, we were thinking about the area of maybe the volume in dollars that you have with that particular entity. What's the annual funding threshold that your organization would consider in order to nominate a piloteer? Entities that you have issued less than $500,000 to that entity as a whole during the year, or entities that you've issued $500,000 to $1 million during the year, or entities that you've issued over $1 million of subcontract funding during a year. So again, we're trying to assess, you know, what would be an appropriate criteria for your consideration to nominate an entity to participate in the pilot. Thank you for that comment. And our next, so looks like we have our results here. Okay. And I think we will address a comment that we got in the chat regarding another kind of criteria that we can consider. But it looks like the predominance is the under 500,000 mark in terms of dollar volume. But very close though to the 500K to 1 million. So 37% closely follows. So thank you. So the next polling question, and again, it addresses a comment that has been put in the chat. What is the annual total number of executed subawards and amendments that your organization has issued to a sub-site? So would it be equal to or less than 10 per year? Would it be between 11 and 25 executed agreements during that year? Would it be more than 25 executed agreements during that year? Wow, very close. Very, very close.
This is an interesting result.
I wonder if you considered the responses by the institution size, you would get a similar breakdown where, you know, the larger institutions would require more and more subawards to make it worth sending it, whereas smaller institutions might be willing to do it with fewer than 10. But the very interesting results.
Yeah. Definitely we consider that when we send the invitation to PTEs to nominate piloteers.
There was a question in the chat here about, this is from Alex Albanek, about whether or not there will be a control group during the pilot to assure it gathers the equivalence form. Are you saying like to assess the integrity of the data that we're getting in these responses? Because I don't think there's going to be a control group, to use that terminology. The control group would be just kind of no information, like, or whatever institutions do to gather information from non-single audit subrecipients or potential non-single audit subrecipients. But I don't think, in Alice and Tyra, you can answer as well. I don't think there's going to be any effort to compare what we're getting in the Nsap to what we would be getting in the absence of this pilot, because there's just too much variation between what institutions do. And so I'm hoping that answers the question. But Tyra, Alice, if you had more to say on that, or Alex, if that doesn't answer your question, please let us know.
Well, thank you. Somebody subsequently said in the chat that part of their issue about why they were unsure is that they wanted to be able to look at the form, go back to their compliance people, and confirm that it's collecting everything that their institution requires. And so I wasn't sure. That kind of gets to what I was thinking, is throw out a form and then all of a sudden all of our compliance people say, our, you know, risk determiners, that it doesn't have enough information so we can't use it. So I was just curious about the step that was going to make sure that we could, as broadly as possible, have people participate.
Right. So one thing I can say is that the information, again, closely mimics what is currently in the Expanded Clearinghouse profile. So we have not left any stone unturned as that is related. However, when we get the approval to do the separate session to demo the Nsap to you all, we would love your attendance and any feedback that you can provide to us as to if there's something else that your entity may consider that we didn't for the profile. But again, it very, very closely mimics the data that is collected on the current Expanded Clearinghouse profiles.
Great,
and
thank you.
In addition to that, as we mentioned at the beginning, the Nsap is the merge between the Expanded Clearinghouse profile and a financial questionnaire that was developed a couple of years ago. So we are going to have a webinar on the financial questionnaire in October. So the invitation is going to come in a couple of, probably next week or so. So please make sure that your key folks at your organizations attend this webinar. We are going to present all the financial questionnaire, which is absolutely 100% embedded in this Nsap. And that can give you an idea of all the other aspects or questions that we are asking and documents that we are requesting from the piloteers. So you can have a better idea whether you will be more comfortable in using the Nsap instead of your own institutional forms. And again, as Tyra said, we are going to have in the future an Nsap presentation of the complete form before we launch the pilot. Something else that I want to add is that, yes, there is a certification at the end of the Nsap where the authorized official is certifying that the information is accurate. And before the Nsap it gets publicly available through the FTP, the working group is going to do the vetting, and not the vetting, but the confirmation of the information to make sure that we are publishing as accurate information as possible. So we are not going to just get whatever we receive and publish it. We are going to do the same analysis that is done for the Expanded Clearinghouse profiles to make sure that the information that we publish is accurate. So I think that's, I don't know if you have any more questions in the chat from this section that we might want to address.
There are just a couple comments about whether or not a certification of any kind would be included in the form. Not delinquent on federal debt or you know, not deported or suspended or whatnot. So.
So the same thing, we have the COI certification, we have the SAM registration certification. And again, we, as I said, we're mimicking largely the information that is already available in the Expanded Clearinghouse profile, but we also are going to be in alignment with the updates that were mentioned earlier, that for information that was proposed to be removed or tweaked in some way. So we just want to let you know that we will stay in alignment with the Expanded Clearinghouse profile information as well.
Thank you, Tyra. So I think we thank you for the polling questions. It might provide us some like very interesting feedback, and we are going to consider it when we compose all the documentation, because all of this has to be approved by the executive committee before following next steps. So we will keep you informed in the process. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I just want to talk a little bit further about the financial questionnaire. That document was originally developed between 2017 and 2018, I remember, and it was developed by the FDP, and it was like drafted but never rolled out. And now the monitoring tools took it over, and we review it to make it compliance with current version of the uniform guidance and whatnot. And then the questionnaire provides hover information for every question. It comes with a companion user guide, not only for the institution, organization filling out the questionnaire, but also for the PTEs on how to interpret the information that the sub-recipient is providing. So we are going to have an in-depth session on this one in October. As I mentioned, we are going to send the email. So please make sure you sign up for this webinar. The financial questionnaire collects, as the Nsap does, the financial questionnaire also collects for policies, procedures, and all those documents that we are asking for the cost sharing, cost transfer, personnel, all those aspects of the grants management, administration, and whatnot. The intention is for those non-single audit institutions that don't feel comfortable or do not want to participate in the Nsap, the working group is suggesting the community to take a look at the financial questionnaire that was developed and then consider using that financial questionnaire as their annual questionnaire that they send to those institutions to collect the information to do the risk assessment on a regular basis. The intention, as Tyra mentioned before, is to reduce administrative burden all the way through. So if we can have this tool that was already developed and we can implement it in our own institutions to collect data or to collect information from the non-single audit entities, that is going to help our sub-recipients with less administrative burden. And as Tyra mentioned earlier, they can get used to and familiarized with the same questions, so it can also reduce the time that it takes for them to provide the information that we need. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just to mention the off-cycle meeting that is going to happen in October, and where we are going to have this in-depth walkthrough of the financial questionnaire, and it's going to be like you will be able to ask questions and whatnot, and it would be very interesting and useful if the key persons and your organizations can attend the webinar, so they can see what the financial questionnaire is. And this is the second half of the Nsap, considering that the first half is the expanded clearinghouse questions. The second half is the financial questionnaire. So this would give them the information that might be needed to move the maybe to yes. And that's all for the Sub-Recipient Monitoring Tools Working Group. With that, I will transfer it back to Carrie.
Great, thanks, Alice. So as mentioned during the working group updates, a federally funded Research and Development Centers working group was created. And in conjunction with that effort, we put together a thought exchange and sent it out to the Subawards listserv. We received a lot of great feedback. We kept it open for several months. And this feedback will hopefully help inform our joint working group with the contracts folks. We had 78 people participate in the thought exchange, and you can see the breakdown in activity. Additionally, we created a thought exchange designed to gather information on how we as the Subaward subcommittee can better engage faculty within the FDP, which we all know is an important aspect of the overall focus of the FDP. The thought exchange was sent out to the faculty listserv. We had 19 participants and a rather high percentage of shared, rated, and explored thoughts. And our hope is to really use this feedback to develop faculty-oriented Subawards training or resources. Next slide, please. So this slide is one of the word clouds pulled from the Ffrdc thought exchange. And in case you're not familiar with what a word cloud is, it's just a simple way to visualize data. The more specific word appears in a source of textual data, the bigger and the bolder it appears in the word cloud. So as you can see, some of the most pressing concerns revolved around prime terms and conditions, problematic language, flow of funding, and templates. Next slide. So these were the top 3 key thoughts on working with Ffrdcs. And throw out a disclaimer, if there are any national labs in attendance today, the thoughts that we're sharing are in no way meant to be disparaging. Working with the Ffrdcs is incredibly beneficial and critical to achieving project-specific aims, and we're all really grateful for the opportunity to work together. And we understand that the national labs have to abide by their own funding agreements, and so we hope some of their shots just affirm the complex nature of these relationships, and really our end goal is to provide some jumping off points to kind of better understand the process. So one of these thoughts is the Ffrdcs won't or they can't agree to act as a sub-recipient. This is particularly problematic when the nature of the Ffrdc's work is that of a sub. Ffrdcs operate under their own funding agreement, which implies an inherent conflict between the priorities terms and the Ffrdc's funding agreement. So that could be sort of a challenge of moving forward. And most Ffrdcs insist on using their own template agreements, and that could be part of the funding agreements that they have themselves that they have to abide by. So frequently these agreements include terms that require advance payments, and this can be difficult for a lot of institutions and requires additional review and possible negotiation. And this can sort of feel like an increased administrative burden and potentially slow down the execution process. Next slide. So this is just another visual of some of the top things, and it's kind of just in order of thought. So, agreement language, process, payment terms, and the collaboration synergy. All of these really make sense in light of what we know and are pretty consistent with what we've heard from the community. It's, it is, I hate to say, but it is what it is. And, as we move forward with the working group, this information is going to really help guide some of the questions that we ask, and possibly reaching out to some of the national labs. And so thanks to everybody that participated. This is very, very useful information. So next slide, please. This is just the the word cloud from the faculty thought exchange, it really focused on faculty's understanding of the subaward process and what their specific roles and responsibilities, who faculty should ask for advice, where they step in, what they can and can't do, and sort of understanding, the life cycle of a subaward. And participants and the folks that shared their thoughts were not just faculty, they're also department administrators and others from central offices. So I feel like we got a pretty good view of what folks were sort of interested in and different challenges from different perspectives. So the word cloud's top thoughts included faculty engagement, institution-specific practices, training materials, the burden on faculty, which feels significant, and funding issues. So understanding the mechanism, invoice review, that sort of a thing. So things that we would understandably see as issues, challenges that faculty might encounter, questions that they might have. Next slide. So these are some of the key thoughts centered around providing resources for faculty. So like we saw FAQs, best practices, and institution-specific policies or SOPs, things that might be relevant to faculty, and training materials that would be really just applicable to them, and not necessarily like a how-to, but that are really crafted to their needs, and then also the type of institution that they have, or maybe even the type of subawards that they have, and understanding what the time constraints are. So what we are seeing is that the thought exchange confirmed things that we suspected were already issues. So I think this has been helpful in helping just sort of inform like the specific needs of faculty. And we're going to take some time over the next several months to sort of think about next steps. This might be a working group to develop resources, or guides for institutions to develop their own training, or just something that can maybe high level overviews, or just points to kind of help move things along in the process. So we do want to make sure that our faculty feel heard and seen, and figure out where we as a subaward subcommittee can sort of partner together with institutions to help faculty engagement. So if there's any feedback or you have any ideas, please send that to the Subawards subcommittee email. We definitely welcome all of that information. Next slide. So yeah, top themes that we saw really just make sense with what we've experienced. So thanks. Next slide.
Yeah, I also think that just as part of the, an overall effort in FDP to make even presentations like this more relevant to faculty, we've thought about that. We think about ways to do that. I know this session is very admin rep heavy, and there's not a whole lot of faculty reps that attend this session. That may have changed a little bit in the virtual world, but we are also thinking about ways to make the presentations and the sessions themselves more relevant to faculty, even if that means like structuring the agenda for the more faculty relevant portion to be up front, and then the admin rep discussion to follow. Okay, we have 2 more topics and plenty of time, so feel free to let us know if you have any thoughts in the chat. We're going to talk about SAM registration and state law. So we have received a lot of questions about this on listservs and in individual communications in the subaward inbox about whether or not a full sam.gov registration is required in order to issue subawards to a subrecipient. And we're obviously talking about non-FDP member subrecipients here. This is not something you really need to worry about for FDP members serving as subrecipients. And as a reminder, it is not only okay, it's more than okay to use the FDP template for with non-FDP member subrecipients. It's encouraged as long as you aren't altering the terms and conditions, that's just fine. So while many, if not most institutions include a full active SAM.gov registration as part of their internal checklists before issuing a subaward, or as an important step in their subrecipient risk assessment process, it's not a federal government requirement. As we were talking about earlier, maybe in the future, there will be some helpful Nsap or non-single audit profiles that you can refer to for all your risk assessment needs. But I just wanted to include a clause from the Code of Federal Regulations clarifying this requirement that its subrecipients are not required to complete a full SAM registration, but they are required to take initial steps in SAM.gov to obtain the UEI, the Unique Entity Identifier. David Mayo from Caltech provided a very clear and helpful response as usual to this question on the contracts listserv, I'd say a couple weeks ago. So we will probably cross-post that on the Subawards listserv because it contains a lot of helpful links and resources to explain this requirement, to clarify, and to even help subrecipients to take the required steps in SAM.gov to obtain a UEI. And a key takeaway here is that, with this slide, we're not saying that pass-through entities can't ask for or require at their level a full active SAM.gov registration before issuing a subaward. Just want to clarify what the federal regulations say and clarify what is and what is not required by federal regulations here. And I also wanted to point out that in attachment 1, the certifications and assurances, attachment of the subaward template, there is a clause about debarment, suspension, and other responsibility matters. And I, would suggest that you could specifically flag that clause during the drafting and review and negotiation stage. Sort of similar to when we added the telecommunications ban related to 200.216, I found myself on a few occasions explicitly flagging that clause to subrecipients and having that conversation during the review and negotiation stage prior to full execution. But that clause is included in the subaward template. Okay, there's a question in the chat about a subrecipient that was previously fully registered that had a full and active registration that may have since lapsed. Can you move forward with a subaward based on the fact that they have the minimum SAM UEI? Yes, I think the takeaway is from the federal regulations perspective, as long as they have the UEI, you can engage them as a subrecipient under federal awards. Okay, stay tuned on the listserv for, again, I'm gonna piggyback off of David's response in the contracts listserv. I'll cross-post that to the subawards listserv, which has more links to this information. Next slide, please. Okay, time flies. It's been 1 year since we discussed state law and subawards at one of our subaward sessions. But we've heard a lot of questions come up on the listserv and in individual conversations in the subawards inbox. And the contract subcommittee brought up state law issues in their session yesterday, and they're starting the discussion, on their end. So what I'm going to do is just recap what we talked about in September of 2021, and a lot of that happened in the conversation and in the chat. So I'm just going to recap a few things, but feel free to add your thoughts or questions, comments in the chat as I go through here. Our FAQ number 52 clarifies how we recommend incorporating state-specific laws into subawards. And that happens in attachment 2's additional terms, which is a free text box for you to copy and paste whatever the requirement may be. And the FAQ number 52 says that including state-specific laws is okay if they're mandated by state law and applicable to the subrecipient. So it's sort of like a two-step process there. We strongly discourage generic imposition of additional terms like choice of law, insurance requirements, and indemnification. And the good news is we rarely see those types of issues. We rarely see situations when people are trying to impose generic or broad reaching terms in their subawards. But pass-through entities, and in this case state institutions, should be careful that any additional terms don't conflict federal law, and as a courtesy, try and ensure that any state-specific laws being added to subawards are truly required and required to be included in a subaward under federal funds. And this example that I have here is, absolutely not to pick on Florida or any of the institutions there, and definitely not any of the research administrators there who we've worked with on this issue over time. But this is the most commonly cited example that's brought to our attention. So I just wanted to provide this as one of many examples, many state-specific laws across many states that you might see in a subaward. And this is levying a requirement to use E-Verify for subcontractor employees, with subcontractor being defined in that same Florida state law on employment eligibility. So I don't know what thoughts people have about this particular question, but I did, since we're talking about it and we had a tangible example, I wanted to provide that. And more on some interesting polling from the contracts committee session yesterday that I'm going to bring up. But let me just recap some of the discussions that we had last year. There were 3 questions in particular that people were asking, and the answer to all of them is either not yet or maybe. So let's see what we can discuss here. One question from sub-recipients was, can pass-through entities seek out and grant specific exceptions to any state-specific laws for subawards under federal funding? Reasonable request, but the answer was, unfortunately, not really. We've not really seen any exceptions carving out subawards under federal funding, at least not seen any formal written communication in this regard. The best we've seen was preceding the state law with if applicable, or to the extent possible, or some sort of qualifying language before including the state-specific law and attachment to additional terms. But we haven't seen any explicit formal carving out of subawards under federal funding from state-specific laws. The second question was, can state institutions provide policy justification or more specific references to these laws and to the requirement that they be included in subawards under federal funding? And the answer to this was, it's unlikely that you would get that attached to the draft or to the email subaward as you receive it as a subrecipient. The main reason was that a lot of these requirements are coming from general counsel offices or other offices at universities or within states that don't have to do with the day-to-day subawards work. So it's unlikely that, again, in a formal sense, you would get this as a subrecipient, but we have definitely seen individual research administrators do the best they can to provide informal justification or provide references to the state laws and the requirements that they're operating under, and sort of making their best effort in good faith to communicate that to the subrecipients, and I definitely applaud that. but a lot of research administrators are simply operating under their institutional policies, auditor requirements, and state laws. And, you know, many of them don't necessarily love the situation they're in with regards to flowing down these terms. And the third question was, can there be greater coordination across state institutions within a particular state? Can we do more to specify the requirements and make it appear more consistently in subawards? And the answer to that was, we had some really interesting conversations. The answer is not yet. I'm not aware of any published statewide. I believe, you know, using Florida as an example, there was a standard attachment to B addressing some state-specific laws that needed to be flowed down, and I had seen that appear in subawards from different institutions in Florida serving as pass-through entities. But we had even talked about, can FDP maintain some sort of database on these requirements? That would be costly, burdensome, difficult to keep track of. So I would just say, as of right now, we're not there with any formal documents trying to coordinate state-specific laws across state institutions within a particular state. Okay, so those are the questions that we had. I'm going to pause to just take a look at the chat, see if there's any questions coming up there.
No questions related to this subject, Kevin.
On the SAM requirements, okay.
Yes, just some requirements.
Okay, so again, the contract subcommittee had a great session yesterday, and they polled the audience to see if any institutions have walked away from subawards because of state-specific laws that they were not able to accept. And the poll was framed in two different ways. So it was between 26 and 38% of respondents said that their institution has walked away from subawards because of state-specific laws they couldn't accept. This is a non-scientific poll. You know, that doesn't mean, you know, it could have only been one subaward or one particular case. So it's kind of hard to extrapolate, but it was higher than I thought. It was higher than I expected. But I think it's great that the contract subcommittee plans on looking at state laws. And we're happy to share information and seek volunteers from the subawards community to participate in these efforts. And what we didn't really get after we discussed this in September 2021 was, like, we asked for people to provide more specific examples and ideas, whether you're a state institution dealing with this issue as a pass-through entity, or whether you're a state or private institution dealing with this issue as a subrecipient. Some more specific examples that we can work with, because we're sort of just gathering anecdotes, and it's sort of hard to figure out if there's anything that FDP can do or what FDP should do without a little bit more specific examples. But we're very much looking forward to working with the contract subcommittee to look more closely at how we handle state-specific laws amongst one another. And that poll where between 26 and 38% of respondents said they've walked away from subawards, I would add that even if you don't walk away from a subaward, state-specific laws in subawards have proved to be burdensome. They've kind of proved to make people worried about risking contradiction of terms or inconsistency across subawards or confusion. And in some rare cases, the requirement has led to the creation of additional paperwork, like requiring a signed affidavit in addition to the subaward, a signed affidavit addressing a specific state-specific law. So even if you don't walk away from the subaward, there can be a whole lot of burden and problems, you know, even if you do sign a subaward, and even if you are already in compliance with the requirement. One of the benefits of the subaward templates that we have is there's sort of the, you know, only what's necessary to execute a subaward. And when we start adding additional terms, even if the subrecipient is already in compliance, it kind of kind of just makes things a little bit more burdensome. Everything from the review to the negotiation to the documenting the requirement in the system of record, or as a subrecipient, how do you report back to the pass-through entity on an additional requirement that you're not used to. There's a lot of burden aside from just like walking away from a subaward. Okay, any other questions or comments on this? Okay, no. So please send examples or ideas, and we'll probably also be looking for anyone that's particularly involved with this at their institution to participate in this joint effort with the contracts subcommittee to look more closely at state law. Okay, next slide, please. Before we go, there were a few other things that I wanted to throw out there. To Kari's point on all the working group updates, stay tuned for more formal requests for volunteers. If anyone wants to participate in those, we will likely solicit volunteers via the listserv and ask people to respond to the Subawards inbox so we don't have a million emails out there on the listserv. But we will be trying to ask for people to participate in some of those ongoing or pending working groups that we have. And then a note, some of these sessions have addressed how the website or the different pages on the FDP website look. The Subawards website has 43 links, which is a lot of links and a lot of documents to maintain. Some of them are used way less frequently than others and therefore have been looked at or updated in a couple years. We appreciate people letting us know if they can't find something, letting us know if there's a broken link or if something's missing or worded incorrectly. But with Beth and Kari joining the templates working group and us using this opportunity in 2023 to review the templates, we're also going to be reviewing the FAQs and guidance and the associated resources. And we're going to look for a way to make the all these 43 hyperlinks, more organized and clear, more user-friendly, sort of in conjunction with a FDP-wide effort to kind of improve the way our website faces users, both FDP members and anyone else that wants to use the resources posted on the website. And then the last point, there was a session on the data management and sharing policy on Monday, and there was a reference to subawards in the data management and sharing policy for NIH. All that is TBD. We'll look into that and make sure that our templates work under any new policies that are rolled out, and that we make each. Sorry, someone. Okay, so we're gonna make sure that the templates are adjusted accordingly and that they work in accordance with any changes to NIH policy on the data management and sharing side. But as Melissa Korf pointed out in that session, facilitating data transfer, use, management, sharing, reporting, and all of that is something that the templates already do. So this is not completely new to the subawards community, but we may have to make some changes based on NIH's new policy in 2023. So just wanted to point out that we got a reference in that session and more to follow on that. So I think I'm done unless people have any questions.
Stephanie's going to give an update about the website during the committee report outs tomorrow afternoon, the FDP Communications Committee, if anyone can attend.
Okay, thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the Expanded Clearinghouse for providing great updates on your end. I think these joint sessions have gone really well and very efficiently. We're wrapping up early. Please reach out to either Expanded Clearinghouse or the Subawards subcommittee if you have any questions about what we presented. And again, thanks again for your time.